call. Firstly, Dr. Jonathan Coleman, and then the Honourable Member Tim Grosser. So I call the Honourable Minister, Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, that was a somewhat revelatory call by the Leader of the Green Party, and I honestly believe he does agree with everything he said, but that is the sad point. Look, you'd expect that from the Greens. That is incredibly misguided. I mean, the basic fact of it is there is not going to be mass surveillance of New Zealanders under this bill. The intention and the consequences of this bill is it is going to correct Labour's flawed 2003 legislation. So we are actually clarifying what's going to happen. In regards to spying on New Zealanders, look, the fact of it is anything that the NZDF, the police or the SIS commissions the GCSB to do on their behalf will be done with a totally legal basis. So this is actually going to narrow the scope of the GCSB's activities with regards to New Zealanders. But I can understand how the Greens would be so off the mark with this because, frankly, they are on a different planet. Russell Norman there, an apologist for Ed Snowden, he was quite upfront about that. So I can understand that. What I can't understand is that the Labour Party, who know better, have decided to play petty party politics with this whole process. And Phil Goff, he was a Minister of Defence. He knows the threats that are out there. He knows why this legislation is needed. He was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, and yet he is not taking a firm grip of his leader and telling his leader, this is legislation that is needed. We need to correct the flaws in our legislation of 2003. There's no question of that. And I know that members over there, they have decided very cynically to exploit the degree of lack of knowledge out there in the public, and they're fermenting it. They're saying this will lead to mass surveillance when they know actually it will not lead to anything of the sort. And it's a major disappointment because on security matters we should have a bipartisan approach in this Parliament. And it was incredible to hear David Shearer speaking there. He is saying that he wants an investigation into the intelligence services in New Zealand, and then in the same breath he is criticising Prime Minister John Key for detailing those threats. Well, I can tell you, if New Zealanders had a full understanding of the threats that were out there, they would know that this is legislation we absolutely need. So this is not a power that's going to be used to spy willy-nilly on any old person out there who might criticise the government or an agency. This is a power that's needed for the very security of our country. And if you look at those 88 New Zealanders who GCSB has spied on over the last 10 years, they were people involved in organised crime, involved in people smuggling, with links to overseas terrorist groups, people involved potentially in research to do with weapons of mass destruction. These aren't the sort of people who were marching against the bill around the country on Saturday. These are people who are major security threats to our country, and it is absolutely vital. And if the Green Party thinks that there's not a growing security threat, well, they only need to look through the history of the world since the year 2000, because I can tell you, in every major global terrorist incident, New Zealanders have been caught up. New Zealanders caught up in 9/11, in the Bali bombings, in the London tube bombings. And it is naive if anyone thinks that there aren't people in this country holding New Zealand passports both here and travelling overseas who potentially don't present a threat to our national security. So this is very important legislation, but the key thing is it doesn't allow for mass surveillance. Everything that the police, the SIS and the Defence does in terms of using the GCSB has to be done with legal authority. So it's a very strong protection for the rights of New Zealanders. And I think it's time that the Labour Party took their misguided Green Party colleagues by the scruff of the neck and said, look, this issue is serious. You've got to actually work with the government. to come to a sound understanding of this. The last thing I would say is that for Russell Norman to say that millions have died, or hundreds of thousands, in the free world fighting against this sort of legislation is completely wrong. And for Dame Anne Salmon to say, if you vote for this, don't come to Anzac Day, is completely misguided. This is totally in line with the wishes of those who have died in previous conflicts for New Zealand, namely the security and the well-being of the people of New Zealand. Thank you, sir.
I call the Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr Speaker, I listened very carefully to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party and the co-leader of the Green Party.